Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second Spotlight, which is a new venture for Frankenstein Chat. And Spotlight is where we invite a guest on, and we generally just talk about one particular item. And the last time our first guest was Dennis Sherwood, who spoke about the sort of vagaries and the odd nature of GCSE and examination grading. And that has been very well received. But today, I'm delighted to say we're joined by Edmund Barnett Ward. Hello, Edmund.
Hello.
Hello. And the reason why Edmund's joined us is because I read a piece in Schools Week on the 9th of August. And the headline of that piece, I'm not sure whether Edmund actually wrote the headline, but the headline was, "We will not forget Ruth and will not let Ofsted forget her." And I'll at that point allow Edmund just to introduce himself and to explain that headline before we get into some of the sort of chat.
So I'm Edmund Barnett Ward. I'm a parent of a child at Caversham Primary, and I've been a parent of children at Caversham Primary now for the last 14 years. My eldest has just turned 19 and is off to university, and he went through the school. And I love the school, and I'm not a particularly over enthusiastic parent in terms of CPSA or anything, doing parent teacher association. I've always helped out at the school barbecue and at the Christmas fair, but I think I'm a relatively normal, ordinary parent, and I doubt there are many people in the country, certainly very few educators, who won't know that the head teacher of Caversham Primary, Ruth Perry, took her own life in January as a direct result of an Ofsted inspection. And since that time, I've been working towards, don't like the word campaigning, but I've been working towards trying to affect some change in Ofsted and try to make it a more humane organisation, and obviously at the heart of things that we need a regulator, and that we need schools to be held to account for their actions. But at the same time, I feel that something horribly went wrong, and it seems that it has been really quite difficult to get that acknowledged. And so I will carry on pushing until I've effected change, until also that I've had that acknowledged.
Because I was saying before we started recording, I feel quite nervous about this discussion, and I was saying to Stan and to Edmund that just generally hack into these conversations and see where they lead. But obviously this is for me a much more sensitive one. But is there something around the holding to account? You used that term before. Is there something not quite right in terms of the balance of this holding to account, and where the sort of the weight of the accountability, where it sort of lands when things go well as where things don't go quite so well?
Yes, accountability is a phrase that has run through this whole situation on many levels. I mean, Ofsted would say that they were holding Ruth Perry accountable for her administration of the school and its supposed deficiencies. But this is one of those situations where I find Amanda Spielman particularly, and I don't want to immediately jump on an individual, because it's not about an individual, it's about a system.
So much wider, yeah.
But she is representing this system, and she does continued to frame what she calls the discussion that has happened after the events at Caversham Primary as a discussion about accountability. And it isn't a discussion about accountability, it's a discussion about impact. It's a discussion about how Ofsted impacts the mental health of educators. And it isn't about not making people accountable. We all want the best education system for our kids, but that education system has to be proportionate, fair, consistent, transparent, accountable. The watchwords of all good regulators, any regulator, the regulator in charge of TV, of banks, what they do has to be fairly administered, and their analysis of whatever it is that they're looking at has to be fairly applied across the board to everyone. It has to be transparent, so what they're looking for and what they are criticizing has to be obvious and known to everybody. And if there are issues, they have to be accountable for those issues. And it is the unique way which Ofsted was set up with the Education and Regulation Act of 2006, which means that it, as a regulator, it does not have to conform to some of those guidelines that other regulators do. It's accountable to no one but itself. There's this, if you actually sort of drill down into the Act, the chief inspector themselves, once appointed, is basically accountable to no one other than the king. Only the king can remove them, and that is ludicrous to me. I think that we have to be operating in a world of common sense, where when there is a problem, when something's gone wrong, and by any metric, I would say that the death of a important community leader and a brilliant school head is a thing that we shouldn't ignore. And it's just seemed like people have wanted to ignore it.
Right.
Yeah, I do think people have jumped on the defensive rather than opening up and saying, well, what did go wrong, and what, you know, it's been a case of, well, whose fault was it, rather than, well, let's not look at blame, let's look at our system and what about it doesn't make sense. And for me, and I've said this a number of times, to have one judgment that can then become an overall judgment is flawed.
Yeah,
particularly in the case where it could be administrative or something that sounds far more serious than in day-to-day life of a school really is.
So to inject some positivity, we've been working now with the Secretary of State and at the Department of Education for the last 8 months or so. We've had 14 hours of meetings, 9 hours of which were with the Secretary of State herself.
Goodness me, that's I mean, in a way, that I'm glad that you've been able to air that, you know, because because that's a weakness in the system, isn't it, to give a sense of the level of commitment from the most senior education minister.
And you know, the people, so the regional head of the DFE, Kate Deathridge, all the way up to Juliet Chua. We've had the most senior civil servants, we and the Secretary of State, and we have already achieved a lot of things that have made a demonstrable difference. So, for example, if you go and look at the website now, you will see that Caversham Primary is rated good, and that's because of a change that we had affected, whereby now if in the situation where a school is rated good or outstanding in every metric apart from safeguarding, if the issue is safeguarding, then they have a right to a re-inspection within 3 months, and it's a quick inspection just to see that those safeguarding issues are resolved.
Do you think Edmund, though, that the report should be withheld until that re-inspection?
I absolutely do. I was going on to say,
sorry,
the it's, with all of these things we have moved a long way, and that's great, but at the same time I don't understand why it can't be like an MOT. You know, I take my car in, my rear indicator's not working, I don't immediately crush my car because it's failed to send the MOT. I have the opportunity to fix that light and re-inspect it straight away, and if it passes, then I get my certification. And I don't see why schools and school leaders and teams should be subject to public humiliation because they have failed a few clerical tasks. But it's sort of it is such an onion of a problem. We keep peeling back layers and layers and layers, and so I can't talk about that without saying, but again, it comes back to what the regulations are being completely transparent, because schools can fail because they haven't recorded safeguarding issues in a way that the inspection team that's in their school at that time are happy with. There isn't a prescribed central resource. They just say there has to be one. But then if you come in and you're not using the database that they're happy with at that time, then you're penalized. And the whole area of safeguarding, I mean, ideally, I think that we would remove safeguarding from an Ofsted inspection regime completely and have a completely separate and more frequent safeguarding inspection, like a checkup. So and almost like a yearly checkup, because it seems to me, again, ridiculous that we have had a situation that, thanks to Michael Gove, schools that were rated outstanding, some of them haven't had an inspection for over 10 years. And when safeguarding, if you're saying that safeguarding is front and center and literally the most important factor when looking at an inspection, then you have to be consistent with that message and say, well, if it's the most important thing, then surely it shouldn't be the case that a school's not inspected for 10 years. Surely we should have a more frequent but more transparent system. So, you know,
I would call it I know I've said it before on Frank and Stan chats, an audit. So there should be a safeguarding audit and a financial audit, a probity audit on a regular basis. And what Ofsted should do is respond to those audit reports, not try and do the job themselves.
Yeah.
And we have experts in safeguarding. So why aren't they doing the auditing rather than somebody who may not be? I'm not saying that none of the inspectors are, but some will not be experts in safeguarding.
Yeah.
And I propose that a lot of that should be knocked into sense prior to the inspection team coming, by having a professional conversation and sharing documentation of audits, of results, of peer reviews, so that all that is seen by the inspection team before they set foot in, and any anomalies are straightened out before they set foot in.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is that I'm now actually getting anecdotal evidence of other changes that they haven't been explicit about making. So certainly things that we've been asking for, so that for example, those clerical issues, if they're able to be resolved within the time frame of the inspection, they are allowed to be resolved within the time frame of the inspection. So for that classic example of something not being recorded, an incident that exists on paper that's not gone into the system, that would be a serious demark before. Now we can say, well, you can enter it. It takes 5 minutes to enter that into the system. Go and enter it into the system, and it's the thing about when we look at Ofsted and what Ofsted is for. It should always be about achieving better outcomes, better schools, better systems, and how you go about doing that. And I'm sitting here talking to you today because that to you know, they might say at the end of this result, well, you know, Caversham Primary's safeguarding is now robust, and I'll say, at what cost was that? You know,
and the difficulty with safeguarding is you've no real defence, have you? Even if you know it's a clerical error, somebody says, but that could have led to, it never did, and it, you know, the chances of it doing are so slim, but it's there as an argument.
And that's and to this day I still feel, you know, this is happening when, I mean, she used incredibly crass language, but on Friday, Amanda Spielman was defending the results of the judgment again. And, you know, just a few months ago, I was sitting in the pre-inquest to Ruth's inquest, and the coroner had turned to Ofsted because she had received the NHS's serious case review. So it's standard practice that when somebody is approached the NHS for treatment, that and then takes their own life, there is a serious case review. It's just standard practice. And the coroner had assumed that that would be the case with Ofsted, and turned to them and said, I haven't seen yours yet. You know, is that going to be forthcoming? To which the 7 people that were there to defend Ofsted's side in the inquest huddled together, and at which point the lawyer representing them says, no, there hasn't been. All we've done is check that the findings of the inspection were correct with the there has been no introspection whatsoever, no serious case review. So yeah, and to be honest, I think the stage we're at now, the Chief Inspector has had many opportunities to look at this, and she always comes at it from the position of our findings were right, and stopping there.
I think one of the issues for me, because both Stan and I mean, I was quite senior in Ofsted, was responsible for some of the framework developments up to 2012, and Stan and I had a year where we were seconded as head teachers in the mid-90s and worked with a future chief inspector, which for us was the most stunning bit of professional development we ever had. And we still draw back on that when we have these discussions. But for me, is there something in here around the lack of understanding that actually, as an inspector, you record the evidence. There's no sort of videoing of that discussion you had with the DSL or whatever. It's just my notes. And so when you're reviewing the evidence, all you're reviewing are the notes written by the inspector. It's a one-sided reflection of that discussion. And I know that a lot of inspectors would say, well, actually, I know the judgment's going to be this, it's likely to be this. So actually what I do is I sort of weight in with a little bit more negativity in order to secure that judgment. You know, so when you're reviewing the evidence, you're not really looking at a balanced evidence base. You know, it's very much weighted towards Ofsted. So inevitably, if you're reviewing the evidence written by an inspector in order to secure a judgment, all you're going to see is evidence that secures the judgment. It's not going to say, oh, but she said this and I then pushed back, and it doesn't say that, you know?
No.
And I've seen a lot of examples. I mean, you'll appreciate that me being in the position I am now, I'm somewhat of a lightning rod for people's
I can imagine
Ofsted experiences, and many people have reached out, head teachers, parents who have been personally affected, and I've heard incredible things. One of which, in that terms of that evidence gathering, is a situation where you know, a vexatious parental complaint can be given incredible weight without any corroboration of whether what they're saying is factually correct. It's literally taken as gospel in situations where people have been given the inspector's number while present on an inspection, and you think, yes, the evidential basis. I mean, again, it's a constant frustration to me, because obviously with the safeguarding issues that occurred at Caversham Primary, there are things that will never be in the public domain. And so I, as a defender of Ruth Perry, cannot counter what those things are. I can speak to my experience on a lot of different levels. As a parent of children with special educational needs, my eldest is on the autistic spectrum, and 3 of my 4 children have been dyslexic and have had other issues. And I know it's one of those things where I think everybody knows a really good teacher and a really good learning environment and a really good school when they encounter. And my personal experience as someone who is dyslexic, who was not diagnosed as being dyslexic until I was at university, who didn't receive any specialist support. I remember doing joined up handwriting practice and not understanding that they were letters, literally seeing them as patterns to copy. And particularly, I remember doing a line of E's, and as they went along, it sort of went up on its end, so it was more of a loop. And I was just like, well, it's near enough, isn't it? It's fine. I had a pretty dreadful primary school experience and a pretty dreadful comprehensive experience. And so I appreciate the qualities in the schools that my kids go to. And my goodness, I could never have wished for a better primary school than the school that Ruth Perry led, and for a better head teacher. The things that she introduced into that school, the development programs outside of curriculum, you know, she had this fantastic thing, the foundation of all of European language being Latin. She had a Latin club that would do The Simpsons in Latin, and you know, Spanish club and all the other things. Kids who enjoyed maths, and I've got kids who really enjoy maths, could do GCSE, not as some hot housing thing to trumpet, you know, the school, to aggrandize the school. This was about instilling an appetite for education that all my kids have had. You know, my son is just finished with straight A's at A level. He has had a lot of things to overcome, and every step of the way, I can see how it could have been different. How that conversation that we had when he was in year 5, that the school had said, look, sometimes he blurts out the answer to something inappropriately when I've asked a hyperbolic question. I'm not looking for an answer, and he will always give an answer. And some of his behaviours are challenging, but we think that there is something that he can't help those behaviours. So we think what you ought to do is maybe go and have an assessment and see if there's not something else going on there. And that start of that journey has led us to an incredibly positive place with a rounded individual off to university to study a subject he loves. And you cannot underestimate the value of that education, of that environment. And again, this is why. So I will defend Ruth till the cows come home. I don't, I would say it's that thing. I've never denied that there wouldn't be things that could be improved in the school, because I'm sure all schools have issues, and I'm sure there were some issues that were factually correct. Was the judgment proportionate, fair? No way. There's absolutely no way it was, and therefore that's not an individual's. That's not the inspection team's issue. That is the system. So I have to go for the system and try and change the system.
And as you say, all the reports are written by inspectors on behalf of the chief inspector. So when Ofsted publishes a report, any report on anything, they act. The system is set up so that approval is made by the chief inspector, is delegated to some other senior manager. But at the end of the day, that responsibility rests with currently Amanda Spillman. And I think chief inspectors understand the power that they have, but also the risks that come with that. Stan, you were going to say?
What I was going to say was the current framework, or the way it's progressed, has taken away the autonomy of the lead inspector. So that if I think back to my time, which is a long time ago, very different framework, but there was a feeling that there was some integrity in speaking to the head teacher to say, have we got this right? Now, even when it's a critical report, is this right? Does this reflect your school as the school is? And it was always, for me, really important that the head teacher would say, yeah, even a school that you were putting into a category would say, yeah, we knew that was coming, kind of thing, and you've got that right. And I just think that integrity is gone now. If on a single judgment, you have no choice then but to go through. It's like a house of cards, isn't it? Once one's gone, the lot comes down.
Well, there's, dare I say it, I speak not of the chief inspector we have, but the one to come. I know you guys have been looking at what he's been saying, and it's always the case with a high profile appointment like this that actually a lot of you expect the headlines to be about the most salacious aspects of the person, and so zero tolerance is bandied around and exclusions, and that's what I want to talk. But I would encourage everybody to actually go, and we talk about evidence base. His letter that he wrote applying for the job is freely available through the government website. You can read what he thinks, what he wants to do, what he intends to do, and it's one of those things where I think, you know, if he's true to his word, then it's fantastic. I think we could be heading completely in the right direction. But what's also brilliant about those words is that's something to hold him to account for, because
I said to
setting
Frank,
his store out.
I said to Frank after the select committee interview that there were certain things that came out of that I was very encouraged by. But I also recognised him closing things down that he thought probably weren't sitting well with the people who were interviewing him. Which for me, then it's will you have the integrity to stick with what you actually believe rather than what you think people want to hear?
Well, that's I suppose that's the kind of the element of that hearing, which is it's a job interview, and how few of us get a camera on us when we're doing a job interview for one of the most important jobs we'll ever do. I've sort of, I mean, it's but there's so, you know, I'm just going to try and stick with the positive. This idea that Ofsted should be for the education community, by the education community. I know we're going to have a lot of issues with being a head's not exactly a part-time job, and the idea that all of a sudden the most brilliant heads should be leaping up to become Ofsted inspectors is probably fanciful. But
also, Edmund, when the chief inspector or the proposed chief inspector didn't follow that route themselves, I mean, that's
has never done it.
And I think for me, I think a point you made before about the weaknesses in the framework, that there was a similar sort of framework to this, which had the same sort of potential for the sort of mistakes or misunderstandings that have occurred. And that was one that was sort of introduced around the 2008-2009 time. But there was, and I think people realised that framework really didn't cut the mustard. It created these sorts of issues. And what I found quite sad is that there was insufficient depth of understanding about the history of frameworks within Ofsted, that no one actually said to the chief inspector, now look, hang on a minute. There was not too long ago, we went down a similar route, and these were some of the difficulties that we encountered. Now, I think if that did happen, if that conversation did take place and the chief inspector misunderstood it or didn't quite grasp it, I think that's a real shame, because I think the history of inspection frameworks suggests that people in the inspectorate should have known that there were problems emerging about the way that they were adopting this sort of one strike and you're out sort of thing. That was a problem previously, and I'm saddened that hadn't been picked up previously.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's sort of, I'm about to come into some very difficult months, because we've got the actual Ruth's inquest, and there's also the inquiry into Ofsted's efficacy that the Common Select Committee are running, and we have been. I mean, people won't know. No one's going to know me. Everyone's going to know the person I work with, Julia Waters, who was Ruth's sister, and we also work with another Reading head, Lisa Telling, who is an absolutely phenomenal force. The three of us, I suppose, representing the stakeholders in the situation. The person most affected, it was obviously Ruth's sister, Julia, but then we're talking about an inspection regime that's applied to heads. So Lisa is the technical expert, and my role is we are so often as parents told what we want, this inspection system is theoretically done in my name as a parent.
Yes.
But there are so many issues which are very difficult, and you think I've been in the situation of asking for the evidential base for some decisions, and it not being forthcoming, and you think, well, that's because I don't believe there is an evidential base for that decision. I believe it's about political expediency, not about whether people truly want what you're saying they want. One example of that being the issue of single word judgments, and the idea that an organization as complex as a school, with everything that the school has to offer, can be reduced to a single word, is just ridiculous to me. As well as, particularly, the words chosen are imply that a school is either all good or all bad, with very little nuance in between. And I am told that people like this method, and I can find no proof of that whatsoever. The difficulty, I think, the justification that's often used is that people don't fight back against it until something like has happened to us, or to Queen Emma, or any of those other schools that have been in the news, affected by downgrades, unjustified downgrades. You don't, if you're in a school that's good or outstanding, you're not going to complain about the system. No parent was. And I ran up against this brick wall full tilt when I started a petition to remove single word judgments. And I was convinced that I was going to get tens of thousands of people signing up on the first day. And I don't know. I think it's probably languished around 600 signatures, maybe. And you think that's not even the parental population of my school that's so hideously affected by this. And I think that's the simple reality of this situation, is that people will not. The status quo, while it suits them, is fine for them.
Yeah, because 90% of schools get the good judgment.
Yeah.
So why would I? I'm more than happy to chance my arm with those 10 cards that you're going to give me. Yeah. 9 times out of 10, I'm going to get a good. So I really wouldn't want to. I mean, I'm more than happy to sort of take my chances on that one card. I think that this is the saddest thing, I think, where there is this sort of feeling of, well, I'm all right, Jack. Yeah. It won't affect me. I'm probably, there was probably something going on there. We didn't find out about it. That sort of stuff doesn't happen with the inspections we've had. But actually, it's just like a ticking bomb, isn't it? It's just, it could be you next time, the next call that you get.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think what emphasises that, Frank, is the fact that if you read reports, I know you read more than most. I read quite a few recently. You cannot guess the judgment from reading the report. No, it's not possible.
No. And again, I think he's Sir Martin has said that he's open to this, but when you look across at the independent schools inspectorate, and how under that system, any flaw they discover is invited for improvement before the judgment's made. Any flaw. So we're sort of I was reading, just out of interest, because of I was reading a local private school, which is less than half an hour from us, Caversham Primary. So I live literally around the corner from Caversham Primary. It's less than 3 minutes walk for me. And that school had issues with staff with no DBS checks and employing sixth formers to supervise first years with no during study breaks with no supervision or training, no first aid training, and all, you know, things like that. They were given the opportunity to rectify it all. If that was a state school, then that school would be academized. You know, there's just no, without any doubt about it.
Okay.
There's a lot to work with.
I mean, because we've spent nearly 40 minutes, so it's amazing how quickly it goes. But just to bring it to sort of a close, I mean, just could you say a little bit about how, because the school's currently got two head teachers, isn't it? I mean, it's quite. I mean that these are colleagues who probably work with Ruth who have had to step up. I mean, I can't
and who have not been in headship themselves.
Really?
But I think that both of them, their personalities, they are a fantastic little symbiotic unit.
Right.
Now, I believe that they have declared that they don't want to carry on doing it past this academic year.
Right.
That they don't want that to be a permanent arrangement. But they have done an absolutely phenomenal job. I have to say, you know, from my experience of the situation, I think that the local authority has a lot to answer for as well in terms of managing the situation, both before and after Ruth's passing. The school was in operation straight away. There was no breathing space. There was no day off. There was no anything. It was literally straight back in. And I cannot imagine what that was like for them. I cannot. I think that they are both due to give evidence at the inquest, and we will probably all get more of a sense of what that's like. But I know the two of them incredibly well. I mean, we have a little coffee morning at Caversham on a Friday, where the heads, you know, just come out and mingle with anyone who wants to have a little, you know, chat, and it's a wonderful little thing. They are brilliant educators themselves, incredibly intensely positive, wonderful people, brilliant problem solvers, and they have absolutely dealt with this situation in an exemplary fashion. I mean, I know it's sort of, they work to a script that Ruth set, so she you know, she is the benchmark in terms of the way of being, the way of managing the school. They are in her mold, and I know that she drew up the development plan that they worked to in order to rectify the issues with the inspection. So yeah, I mean, it's really hard because
I can imagine, I suppose in a way, just to sort of say well done to those colleagues and everybody else within the staff body and the community for responding in this way. Stan, you're going to say something before we finish?
I just think there's a message, something the company that I run supports about 90 schools in school improvement, and following the events earlier this year, I started ringing heads after an inspection, especially where there'd been some question marks over the judgment. And I've been, even though I've been a head myself, I've been stunned at how that is appreciated, just to say, are you okay?
Yeah.
So if we've learned something from it, I hope local authorities and academies are doing the same thing, and just checking that, yes, you've had a bad judgment. Yes, it doesn't feel fair, but are you okay in yourself? Can we support you in any way? And from what I understand, one particular head, his next visit from the advisor was in tears, not because he was in tears because of that, but because he'd had some acknowledgement and some support, and it emotionally it really boosted him, I suppose. But we all need to have play a part in that, and particularly, I think, and I'm a governor of an outstanding school that's due an inspection any time now. It's not had one for a long time. It's preparing people for the fact that you cannot control it, and even though you are an outstanding school, something can go wrong on day one, day two, and we need to manage that risk in terms of people's mental health and the way people will respond to it.
I'm constantly humbled by the response that I get to things that I'm doing or things that I've said by educators who say that they feel listened to. It's our children obviously are the center of our universe. We want the absolute best for them. We entrust them to people to educate. We entrust them to people for their development. We need to treat those people with respect and kindness and empathy and understand that job. And we need an inspectorate that has the same level of understanding and empathy and compassion for the job. It just seems to be a complete no-brainer to me that the fact that I have to argue for this
yeah, I agree.
seems ridiculous.
Yeah, I agree. Edmund, I still feel rather nervous, but actually I've really enjoyed the chat with you, and I know that others who are going to watch this will also get something from it. So thank you very much for your time, and thank you, Stan.
I was just going to ask Edmund, you've got a tough time coming up.
Yeah.
Would you be willing, when that comes to an end, to come back on and talk to us about what's been achieved?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, we lost Edmund. No, you just paused for a bit there, Edmund, as if it was all staged,
Yeah.
But no, we'd love to have you back. So thank you very much. Yeah. So I'm going to stop the recording, and our next spotlight is in another 4 weeks or so. So we're very keen to hear any of your comments as well about what Edmund has said. So please put those on Twitter or put them on the YouTube channel as well. So thank you very much, and we'll see you all again soon. Bye bye.